Neil Lennon, a former Celtic player and Celtic manager, once received bullets in the post.
Well, of course, it's not just about the financial element. There is traditionally a sectarian flavor to this rivalry where Celtic are the Catholic club associated. They fly the Irish flag often. They're associated with the unification of Ireland as a movement, perhaps even Scottish independence to some extent. Whereas Rangers on the other side are the unionists. They sometimes fly the Union Jack, the British flag. That's traditionally the breakdown. How much is that still the breakdown now? You know, I've covered quite a few derbies around the world, even in Buenos Aires, where there's a similarly pugnacious rivalry between Boca Juniors and River Plate. Some of the traditional class elements there have broken down. Is it the same as it ever was in Glasgow?
No, I don't think that the sectarian element is quite as bad, and I do use that word bad for good reason. I think that, you know, we can go on to perhaps the history of that later if you want, or we can touch on it now, but there is absolutely still within both clubs a tradition, and people go along to both Celtic and Rangers, and not everyone, but go along to both Celtic and Rangers to express their identity and not just the love of a football team. The Celtic traditions, of course, founded by Irish priests, the club founded by Irish priests to feed the poor, the Irish immigrants who were in Glasgow at the time. So it's even the name of the club itself, Celtic, clearly a nod to their Irish origins. So that is still there, and it's still there because generations of supporters have passed down that identity to their sons and daughters, and you will still hear traditional Irish Republican songs being sung inside Celtic Park. There is a strong Irish identity within the club, and I don't think the club shies away from that. Where it has been tricky for both sides, I think where it was at its trickiest, perhaps, was during the Troubles in Northern Ireland, when what happened in Northern Ireland in terms of the tensions was reflected not to the same barbaric levels in terms of violence, but it was reflected in some of the songs that you would hear on the terraces of Celtic Park and Ibrox. And that was very difficult, I think, for both clubs to try and shake. And there have been many accusations that the clubs didn't do enough to shake that. Now, Rangers, until very recently, the 1980s, had an unofficial policy of not signing Roman Catholics. The very first Roman Catholic they signed happened to be one of a former Celtic player, and that to this day still causes anger among some fans of both clubs, it must be said. So it's not as bad as it was. It is still there. It is still something that Scottish football grapples with. It's something that Scottish culture, in the west of Scotland, it should be said, mainly, really grapples with. We've had one former First Minister of Scotland to describe the problem as Scotland's secret shame, and I think many people agreed with that. You will still hear on both sides glorification of terrorist groups, not as bad as it was in perhaps the 1970s and 80s, maybe even early 90s, but you do still hear it. But I think that with the way that football has developed into this global brand, both clubs have tried to look outward, where perhaps before it was a completely inward-looking approach, perhaps not as outward as some people would like. And it's also a very delicate path to tread for both clubs, because they don't want to step away from those origins and those traditions. Rangers being a very traditional Scottish unionist club. For a long time, they had a picture of Queen Elizabeth II in the dressing room. That has been replaced by King Charles. they don't want to shy away from that. They're very proud of that, and that's fine. Likewise, Celtic very proud of their Irish traditions, but it has in the past and even today been something that has been tricky to manage because, and even in the advent of the ultras culture, because you mentioned English hooliganism in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, that has been replaced, and I don't think just, and I know just not just in Scotland, by a new generation of ultras who have taken on, in some ways, some of the rather unpalatable elements of the traditions that some fans wanted to leave behind. I think that with what's happened in Northern Ireland over the past 20 years, it has had a positive impact on sectarianism in Scotland, with people wanting to leave the violence and the sectarianism behind. But look, that is something that's always, I think, going to be, unfortunately, a part of the very fabric of this fixture. It is, without a doubt, one of the reasons that Celtic fans and Rangers fans don't like each other, because of those sectarian roots. There is, of course, a football rivalry there as well, but it is a football rivalry like no other because it is so steeped in tradition, in society, in Scottish culture and Irish culture. And it would take a long, long time to unpick exactly how and why both clubs can extricate themselves from that. I don't think they ever really fully can, as much as they would like to. They have, in Scottish football, the governing bodies have done certain things in recent years to clamp down on it. There have been laws passed in Scottish society to try and clamp down on it, unsuccessfully, it must be said. But it's something that will always be there, I think. But to answer your question, is it as bad as it was? No, I don't think it is, and I think also the modern stereo CCTV, I think, helps in that. People are sometimes quickly identified who are singing songs that are deemed to be sectarian. So I think it's on the right path, I think.
Yeah, it seems like going hand in hand with the religious element, there's an immigration element. Some would say a nativist element. It's an issue that is a perennial struggle here in America. You know, who is an American? What does it mean to be an American? And it seems like in this context, there was a notion that as Scots-Irish, Celtic fans and people of their background were not Scottish in the same way that native Scotsmen were, to whatever that might mean. It is interesting to see how that plays out. I guess it really is tied up in the religious element as well, but slightly adjacent to it.
Yeah, and you're right, and it flows into politics here as well. Celtic have been, for as long as I can remember, politically, some would say socialist, left-leaning club. Very much, they say, a club open to all. Very keen to associate themselves with things like the Palestinian cause, the Catalan cause, Scottish independence more latterly. Whereas on the opposite of that, Rangers have been seen, rightly or wrongly, I'm not saying all Rangers fans, certainly not all Rangers fans, have been seen to be more traditional, more right-leaning, a little bit Real Madrid versus Atletico, if you like, in that sense. So yeah, there is there has been more of a political element to the fixture in recent years because of things like Gaza, because of things like Scottish independence, and that has, as you probably know, got the clubs into trouble with UEFA. UEFA very keen to distance themselves from any political slogans within football matches. Celtic got themselves into trouble recently with some of their views on what's happening in the Middle East, and some elements of the Celtic support were very unapologetic about that. And likewise, Rangers fans, again, their traditional right-leaning views based in unionism and based in tradition and based very much in what they see as British values.
At times, the players have gotten caught up in this. As I understand it, Paul Gascoigne, a legendary Englishman, wonderful player to watch, but he did make a sort of flute gesture at the Celtic fans, which has major ramifications in the context of the Troubles in Ireland. And he later claimed that he was getting phone calls from people purporting to be members of the IRA after this incident.
Yeah, that's right. In the 1990s, Paul Gascoigne, as you say, a legendary English midfielder, signed for Rangers. I think very quickly got caught up in something he didn't really understand, and there are marches here that reflect the marches in Northern Ireland in the summertime, orange parades, and there's also Republican parades as well, but not to a lesser extent. But orange parades here have been a fixture in the west of Scotland as long as I can remember. And part of those orange parades are men who play flutes. And that gesture is very much associated with what is known as the Orange Walk and Orange Parade. And he did absolutely receive death threats. On the flip side to that, Neil Lennon, a former Celtic player and Celtic manager, once received bullets in the post after one particular Old Firm match. An Irish Catholic, very much a figure of hate from quite a few, not just Rangers fans, it must be said. He was always very open that he felt that the hatred towards him was because of his Irish heritage, his Irish upbringing, and being a Celtic player and Celtic manager. So at times that sectarian element has crossed into the extremely unacceptable, and those would be two very good examples of that.